The subject of this seminar is going to be Taoism, as contained in the teachings of Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, who lived approximately 400 years or more before Christ, separated probably by 100 years from each other. And, as is often repeated, Lao Tzu started out by explaining that the Tao, which can be explained, is not the eternal Tao, and then went on to write a book about it, also saying, those who say do not know, those who know do not say, because there's nothing to be explained. You must remember that the word explain means to lay out in a plane. That is, to put it on a flat sheet of paper. All mathematics is done on a flat sheet of paper until very recent times. But it makes a great deal of difference because this world isn't flat. If you draw a circle on a flat sheet of paper, it has an inside and an outside, which are different. On the other hand, if you draw a circle around a donut, the inside and the outside are the same. So, what we are first of all saying is that the Tao, whatever that is, cannot be explained in that sense. So it's important, first of all, to experience it so we know what we're talking about. And in order to go into Taoism at all, we must begin by being in the frame of mind which can understand it. You cannot force yourself into this frame of mind any more than you can smooth disturbed water with your hand. But let's say that our starting point is that we forget what we know, or think we know. That we suspend judgment about practically everything. Returning to what we were when we were babies. When we have not yet learned the names or language, and although we have extremely sensitive bodies, very alive senses, we have no means of making an intellectual or verbal commentary on what is going on. Now, can you consider that as your state? Just plain ignorant, but still very much alive. And in this state you just feel what is, without calling it anything at all. You know nothing at all about anything called an external world in relation to an internal world. You don't know who you are. You haven't even got the idea of the word you or I. It's before all that. Nobody has taught you self-control. So you don't know the difference between the noise of a car outside and a wandering thought that enters your mind. They're both something that happens. You don't identify the presence of the thought, which might be just an image of a passing cloud in your mind's eye, and the passing automobile. They happen. Your breath happens. Light all around you happens. Your response to it by blinking happens. So you simply are really unable to do anything. There's nothing that you're supposed to do. Nobody's told you anything to do. You're unable completely to do anything but be aware of the buzz. The visual buzz, the audible buzz, the tangible buzz, the smellable buzz. All buzz. It's going on. Watch it. Don't ask who's watching it. You've no information about that yet. That it requires a watcher for something to be watched. It's somebody's idea. You don't know that. Lao Tzu says, the scholar learns something every day. The man of Tao unlearns something every day. Until he gets back to non-doing. And that's what we're in at the moment. Just simply, without comment, without an idea in your head, be aware. What else can you do? Don't try to be aware. You are. You'll find, of course, that you can't stop the commentary going on in your head, but at least you can regard it as interior noise. Listen to your chattering thoughts as you listen to the singing of a kettle. We don't know what it is we're aware of. Especially when you take it all together. And there's this sense of something going on. I won't even say that. This, you see? This. Well, I said it was going on. That's an idea. It's a form of words. Obviously, I wouldn't know if anything was going on unless I could say something else wasn't. I know motion by contrast with rest. So while I am aware of motion, I'm also aware of at rest. So maybe what's at rest isn't going on and what's motion is going on. So I won't use that concept because I've got to include both. And if I say, well, here it is, that excludes what isn't, like space. And if I say this, it excludes that. I'm reduced to silence. But you can feel what I'm talking about, can't you? That's what's called Tao in Chinese. That's where we begin. Tao means basically way, and so course. the course of nature, of which Lao Tzu says, Dao Fa Zi Yan, which means, Dao, Fa, means the way of functioning of the Tao. Zi Yan is of itself so, that is to say, is spontaneous. Watch again what's going on. If you approach it with this wise ignorance, you will see that you are witnessing a happening. In other words, in this primal way of looking at things, there is no difference between what you do on the one hand and what happens to you on the other. It's all the same process. Just as your thoughts happen, the car happens outside, the clouds, the stars. When a Westerner hears that, he thinks of fatalism or determinism. That's because he still preserves in the back of his mind two illusions. One is that what is happening to him, and therefore he is the victim of circumstances. But when you are in primal ignorance, there is no you different from what's happening, and therefore it's not happening to you. It's just happening. So is you. What you call you, what you later call you, is part of the happening. You're part of the universe, although the universe, strictly speaking, has no parts. We only call certain features of the universe parts of it, but you can't disconnect them from the rest without causing them to be not only non-existent, but never to have existed. So, when you have this happening, the other illusion that a Westerner is liable to have is that it's determined in the sense that what is happening now follows necessarily from what happened in the past. But you don't know anything about that in your primal ignorance. Cause and effect? Why, obviously not. Because if you're really naive, you see that the past is the result of what's happening now. It goes backwards into the past. Like a wake goes backwards from a ship. All the echoes are disappearing, finally, go away and away and away. And it's all starting now. What we call the future is nothing. The great void. And everything comes out of the great void. That's the way a naive person, and as I explained, if any of you were at my lecture last night, if you shut your eyes and contemplate reality only with your ears, you will find there's a background of silence, and all sounds are coming out of it. They start out of silence. If you close your eyes, listen, just listen. You see the bell came out of nothing, floated off, and then stopped being a sonic echo and became a memory, which is another kind of echo, a wake. It's very simple. It all begins now. And therefore it's spontaneous. It isn't determined. That's a philosophical notion. Nor is it capricious. That's another philosophical notion. As we distinguish between what is orderly and what is random. Of course, we don't really know what randomness is. If you talk to a mathematician about randomness, he'll make you feel quite weird. What is so of itself? Sui generis in Latin. That means coming into being spontaneously on its own accord. It's the real meaning of virgin birth. Sui generis. And that's the world. That is the Tao. That makes us feel scared, perhaps. Because we say, well, if all this is happening spontaneously, who's in charge? I'm not in charge, that's pretty obvious. But I hope there's God or somebody looking after all this. Well, why should there be someone looking after it? Because then there's a new worry that you may not have thought of. Like, who takes care of the caretaker's daughter while the caretaker's busy taking care? Who guards the guards? Who supervises the police? Who looks after God? Well, you say, God doesn't need looking after. Oh, well then nor does this. Tao. Because Tao is a certain kind of order. And this kind of order is not quite what we call order. When we arrange everything geometrically in boxes or in rows, that's a very crude kind of order. But when you look at a plant, it's perfectly obvious that this bamboo plant has order. We recognize at once that that is not a mess. But it is not symmetrical, and it is not geometrical looking. It looks like a Chinese drawing. Because the Chinese appreciated this kind of order so much that they put it into their painting. Non-symmetrical order. In the Chinese language, this is called Li, and the character for Li means originally the markings in jade, also means the grain in wood and the fiber in muscle. We could say too that clouds have Li, marble has Li, the human body has Li. And we all recognize it, and the artist copies it, whether he is a landscape painter, a portrait painter, or an abstract painter, or a non-objective painter. They all are trying for Li. And the interesting thing is that although we all know what it is, there's no way of defining it. But because Tao is the course, we can also call Li the water course. Because the patterns of Li are patterns of flowing water. And we see those patterns of flow memorialized, as it were, in sculpture, in the grain in wood, which is the flow of sap, in marble, in bones, in muscles. All these things are patterned according to the basic principles, that is the Fa, the Tao's principle of flow. There is a book called Sensitive Chaos by Theodor Schwenk, with many, many photographs and studies of flow patterns. And there, in the patterns of flowing water, you will see all kinds of motifs from Chinese art, immediately recognizable, including the S-curve in the circle, the yang-yin. like this. See? So, Li means then the order of flow. The wonderful dancing pattern of liquid. Because Lao Tzu likens Tao to water. The great Tao, he says, flows everywhere, to the left and to the right. Like water, I'm interpolating that, it loves and nourishes all things, but does not lord it over them. Because, he says elsewhere, water always seeks the lowest level, which men abhor. Because we are always trying to play games of one-upmanship and be on top of each other. Now, Lao Tzu explains that the top position is the most insecure. Everybody wants to get to the top of the tree, but then if they do, the tree will collapse. That's the fallacy of American democracy. You too might be president. The answer is, no one but a maniac would want to be president. Who wants to be put in charge of a runaway truck? So, Lao Tzu says that the basic position is the most powerful. And this we can see at once in Judo or in Aikido, which are wrestling arts or self-defensive arts, where you always get underneath the opponent, and so he falls over you if he attacks you. The moment he moves to be aggressive, you go either lower than he is or in a smaller circle than he's moving. And you have spin, if you know Aikido. You're always spinning. And you know how something rapidly spinning exercises centrifugal force. So if somebody comes into your field of centrifugal force, he gets flung out, but by his own bounce. It's very curious. So therefore, the watercourse way is the way of Tao. Now, that seems to white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and to Irish Catholics lazy, spineless, passive. And I'm always being asked when I talk about things, if people did what you suggest, wouldn't they become terribly passive? Well, from a superficial point of view, I would suggest that a certain amount of passivity would be an excellent corrective for our kind of culture. Because we are always creating trouble by doing good to other people. You know, we wage wars for people's benefit. And educate the poor for their benefit, so that they desire more things which they can't get. Wow. I mean, that sounds rather callous, but our rich people are not happy, whereas the poor people of Haiti are, to judge by the way they laugh. And we think we're sorry, really, not for the poor, but for ourselves. Guilty. So, a certain amount of doing nothing and stopping rushing around would cool everything. But also it must be remembered that passivity is the root of action. Where do you suppose you're going to get energy from? Just by being energetic? No, you can't get energy that way. That is exhausting yourself. To have energy, you must sleep, but also much more important than sleep is what I showed you at the beginning. Passivity of mind, mental silence. You can't, as I tried to explain, be passive as an exercise that's good for you. You can only get to that point by realizing there's nothing else you can do. So for God's sake, don't cultivate passivity as a form of progress. That's like playing because it's good for your work. You never get to play. So in the same way, to try and force the issues wears you out. And when you force a lock, you usually bend the key. So you jiggle gently until you find the right opening. So in the same way, anybody who knows how to conduct business always jiggles the key to find the right moment to turn the lock, and then it all happens as if it were natural and none of it were forced. So therefore the water course will give you the sense that your life is a flowing. The flowing is equally you and what is not you, or called not you. It's the process that's happening. And when you understand that, you'll stop asking questions about it. You will see that all asking of questions about it is, shall I say, tautological. You get explanations, but don't explain. All explanations of what's happening call for further explanations, because big explanations have little explanations upon their backs to bite them, and little explanations have lesser explanations, and so ad infinitum. This is the analytic process that produces the atomic universe, the electronic universe, the protonic universe, and so on and so on. And if you go the other direction, you'll find the solar system in a galaxy, the galaxy in a system of galaxies, and then goodness knows what. Because obviously the universe, as it seeks to know itself, must run away from itself. As your eyes revolve when you turn to look at them. You are the universe. You are apertures through which it is aware of itself. Holes in the wall, as it were. And so as you look, now you see it, now you don't. It's very simple. So you will find, therefore, that the big quest, what is it? What am I supposed to do? What is human destiny? Why are we here? These questions will slowly disappear, and that itself will be the answer. The answer will be this is why. And this is what is going on that cannot be described, the Tao. The Tao is simultaneously departing and arriving. Always. That's the meaning of the eternal Tao, the eternal Tao. Well then, to go with the watercourse is called by Lao Tzu Wu-wei. Wu means not, wei as a complex of meanings which can be action, striving, straining, doing, or best, forcing. Not forcing is Wu-wei. So he says, Tao, Wu-wei, Tao does nothing, but nothing is left undone. In other words, Tao accomplishes all things without forcing them. And so therefore, when you master, that's the wrong word, because it has the idea of superiority. When you come to Wu-wei, by, as it were, coming down, you are working on the same principle as the Tao. And so this is likened poetically to the difference between a willow and a pine when it snows. The pine is a rigid tree, and the snow and ice piles up on the branches until they crack. The willow is a springy tree, and when the weight of the snow is on the branch drops and the snow falls off and the branch comes up again. That's Wu-wei. Zhuangzi tells a lovely tale that a sage was wandering along the bank of a river near an enormous cataract. And suddenly, way up beyond the cataract, he saw an old man roll off the bank into the cataract. And he thought, that's too bad. He must be old and ill and is making an end of himself. But a few minutes later, the old man jumped out of the stream way down beyond the cataract and went running along the bank. So the sage and his disciples went scooting after him and said, this is the most amazing thing we ever saw. How did you survive? Well, he said, there's no special way. I just went in with the swirl and came out with the whirl. I made myself like the water, so there was no conflict between myself and the water. So in the same way, when a baby is in an automobile accident, you find often that the baby is uninjured because the baby didn't go rigid to protect itself. So likewise, when you learn to fall in judo, you learn to curl up limply and yet make your arms very heavy so that they flop with an immense thud on the floor. And that making heavy is again like water. And this absorbs the shock. So it isn't, you see, you must realize that the water course is not complete limpness, because water has weight and therefore strength. And that really all energy, the secret of Wu-wei, is that all energy is gravity. We, as a planet, would, if we encountered some obstacle in space, there would be an enormous release of energy. The obstacle would feel that it was being hit by some colossal force. But the planet is falling round the sun. And the sun is falling round something else. The whole universe is falling. But since there's nowhere for it to drop, it's sort of not falling at anything. It's just falling around itself. Sometimes there are collisions, but everything's got so much space that they're very rare. Maybe the ones that didn't have space have been eliminated and became all the dust that's in the sky. But all energy is gravity. That's the secret of judo. And it's really the secret, ultimately, of the puzzle of the relationship of gravity to energy. It's the real secret of E equals mc squared. So now, if you want, you see, to find an intelligent solution to a problem, the work is done with your brain. You have all the necessary intelligence inside this bone. Only most people never use their brains, they use their minds instead. And think that they use their minds like they use their muscles, that you can strain your head and work very hard with it as if it were a muscle to achieve a result. But that doesn't work that way. When you want to find out the answer to something, what you do is you contemplate it. You visualize your problem, your question, as well as you can, and then simply look at it. Because you don't try to find a solution, because any solution that comes in that way is liable to be wrong. But when you've watched it for a while, the solution comes of itself. And that is the way to use your brain. It works for you in the same way as your stomach digests your food, without your having to supervise it consciously. But all our attempts to supervise everything consciously have led to things that aren't too good for our stomachs, and so forth. You know how it goes. So, the reason for that is quite simple. That conscious attention, employing words, cannot think of very much. We ignore almost everything while we're thinking. We think along a single track. But the world isn't going on along a single track. The world is everything altogether everywhere. And you just can't take that into consideration. There isn't time, but your brain can. Because the brain is capable of handling innumerable variables at once, whereas your conscious attention is not. Or rather, more strictly speaking, verbal symbols are not capable of handling any more than a one very, very crudely simple track. That's why we have to trust our brains. Because you see, we are much more intelligent than our understanding of ourselves. When a neurologist admits that he's only begun to scratch the surface of understanding the nervous system, he is actually saying that his own nervous system is smarter than he is. It's outwitted him so far. And that's remarkable, isn't it? So you see, what you are is necessarily more than anything you can understand, for the simple reason that an organism which completely understands itself would be comparable to lifting yourself up by your own bootstraps or kissing your own lips. So there's always this element of the nothing or unknown in any process of consciousness or knowledge. And if that irritates you, remember, you are really addressing yourself to a stupid problem, because fire doesn't need to burn itself any more than a light needs to shine on itself. So for light to ask, "What am I?" although it sounds like a sensible question, isn't. Because how could you answer it? Let me demonstrate this to you in another and perhaps simpler way. For many, many hundreds of years, human beings have wanted to know what is isness. What is matter? Substance. Obviously, it seems there must be a basis for all the shapes that we see. After all, clay is the basis of vessels. Iron is the basis of tools. Wood is the basis of furniture. But what is the basis of that? What is the substance common to everything? Well, we had tried to find out. And that was the reason, at least in the beginning of things, why physicists tried to find out what matter energy is. Well, when you consider the problem, consider the question, ask yourself, what sort of answer are you looking for? Supposing you found out what matter is, in what sort of language would you be able to describe it? And you realize that you couldn't. Because all that language can describe, whether the language be of words or of numbers, is pattern, form. We can measure form, we can outline it, we can explain it. But we couldn't possibly explain stuff. Just basic oomph. There would be no way of talking about it. Therefore, we're asking a silly question. We're asking for a question to be answered in terms which couldn't answer that kind of question. So therefore, we might say, you don't need really the idea of stuff, of matter, because what you've got is form, and I could say it's the form that matters in anything. And you know, you take a double take on that. When you look at the world as form, you will not ask questions about what is it made of? What are these shapes made of? They're because they're not made. It says Dao Wu-wei, and Wu-wei means also not making. Making is different from growing. When a plant grows, it is not patched or put together. All the so-called parts of the plant grow out of it. Whereas when you construct a machine, you assemble the parts and put them together. This is not the way a plant works. It's not the way you work. When you eat your food, it is ridiculous to suppose that this is the raw material of parts which are going to be manufactured in a factory and distributed to screw on to different parts of your body. It's a silly image. So, you don't ask, therefore, what are things made of? The next thing you don't ask is how do they go together? Because here becomes a very, very fascinating thing, that what we are unaware of is that so-called separate things are joined by space. We always think of space as separating, but that which separates also joins. That was why the word cleave is so important. It means to stick to and to divide. So we are cleft by space. When you look at a distant galaxy, we call it a nebula, because we are seeing it from a long way away. When, however, we get close to it, the nebula disappears, and we see individual stars. We are living in the middle of one. From a long way away, all the stars in our galaxy appear to be a thing. But right close up, we don't see that thing. What is it that keeps all these stars together? Oh, we say gravity. Gravity is a word for something. It means simply we don't know what it is. Like the ether that was once supposed to be the fluid through which light was transmitted and was discovered not to exist. That we could somehow do without it. That light went through nothing, through space. Marvelous, apparently. So here are all sorts of things not joined to each other by strings, and yet they constitute a thing. And so when we get down to our own atomic structure, we are, if we were looked at closely enough, we would be like galaxies, with our atoms vastly distant from each other. What holds us together? Isn't that the wrong question? Because what matters is the form. It is your shape. Now, if I saw you some time ago and I meet you again, how do I know you? It's I recognize your shape. If I haven't seen you for some time, when I meet you the second time, there is nothing of you that I knew before. All your so-called substance has changed. Just as if I visit a waterfall, a few seconds later, it's not the same water. It's falling the same way, the same style. And so in the same way, when I meet you today, yesterday, the day before, you're the same style, you're the same pattern, but it's all different. So that pattern can come to an end. And then after a while, it can happen again. Just as if you take a newspaper photograph and look at it under a magnifying glass, what you saw with the naked eye as a clean line will appear to be a series of dots. And the dots are unlike one another. And there's no strings joining them. Change your level of magnification and there's a line. You can magnify in time as well as in space. Only you do it a different way. To magnify anything in time, you speed up the time. So we take a fast motion picture of a bean, and we put the bean on Earth, and we expose one frame per day. And then when we run the movie, we suddenly see the bean moving. It puts out a little feeler, and the feeler goes, and all the stalks and leaves open from it. Out comes a bean, and it eventually crumbles, fades off. Why, we saw a gesture. We saw a happening, which we would never notice with the naked eye. Too slow. Now that is, you see, magnifying time. Now, therefore, let us suppose we had human faces, thousands of faces, which suddenly began as little fetus cells, and we got some turn rapidly into baby face, into child, adolescent, adult, old person, skull and dust, going, all these faces coming and going, making their gesture of going through the whole lifespan. Well, we would watch and we would begin to see patterns of continuity. Which things are moving much too slowly to see these, and things are moving too complicatedly to see them. But stand off at a distance, as it were, and you would see the same rhythms occurring again and again and again and again, so that they would appear from that distance, or from time that speeded up, to be simply continuity, like the continuity from here to here, which looked at closely is full of space. So you would get what we call in naive language the reincarnation of forms. You, considered as this kind of a wiggle that is recognizable as me, would happen again and again and again, with no spook traveling from one happening to the next. That wouldn't be necessary any more than it's necessary to have a line joining one dot in the press photograph with another dot, so that they will make continuous sense at a different level. You know, when you watch television, you're actually watching a moving dot. It moves so fast that it creates the image. Now let's supposing you had a different kind of eye altogether that had no memory in it. You would look at the television screen and you would see this dot dancing all across and leaving no trace. You say, what kind of a funny thing is that? It doesn't make any sense. But seen in another way, you see, all that picture makes sense. So you see, you don't have to, all these mysteries, like our reincarnation, you don't need any spooky knowledge to understand them. It's all right out in front of you, and you will discover that as I talk to you, I'm not going to tell you a thing that you didn't already know. all this was plain to you. All I will do is put it in words in such a way that you will be able to say, well, that's what I always thought, but I could never explain it. Yesterday I talked to you about the three basic principles of Taoist philosophy, namely Tao itself, the course of nature, Wu-wei, not forcing, in other words, the watercourse character of the course of nature, and third, De, which is virtue, or the seemingly magical power which comes of following the watercourse, of taking the line of least resistance, which argues always a high order of intelligence, because it's more intelligent to sail a boat than to row, even though it's a lazier way of doing it. Use the wind, it's like in the same way for technology. We haven't really woken up to the fact that it would be much more intelligent to use the sun, the wind, and the tides as a source of energy rather than fossil fuel. But once again, to understand anything about this philosophy, you really need to be in a state of wise ignorance. I am often cast among people who are frantically conceptualizing and defending their frameworks of conceptualization, who have a very fixed, elaborate theory of the nature of the universe and of man's destiny and of the way to its fulfillment. And you will find too that these conceptions of man's destiny are very ambitious. But once you're in that framework of conceptualization, you become increasingly abstracted from the natural world, as if you were a person who lives in books rather than in life, or lives in the movies rather than with people. Because you begin to fall into the fundamental fallacy of civilization, which is to value the world of symbol above the world which symbols represent. And of course, we in our culture have taken that to the wildest extremes, so that you don't exist unless you possess a birth certificate or a passport, which is a piece of paper. So that the record of what happens is far more important than what happens. Therefore, we waste incalculable energy on recording, on filling out income tax forms, on seeing that in a university the registrar's records are properly protected. The books in the library can go to hell. But they keep safes for the students' records. And so in the same way, a lot of people don't believe that they are real unless they can read about themselves in the newspaper. And a lot of people feel uncomfortable if something fantastic occurs and there's nobody there with a camera to take a picture of it. And so children commit crimes in order to get their names in the newspaper, so that they know they're there, because their parents all the time are using appearance in the newspaper as a standard of importance. And so obviously you are not important unless you too appear in the newspaper, in the record. You will go down to history. And so too we are making records on films and all sorts of tapes of what we call vanishing civilizations, vanishing cultures, vanishing arts, vanishing species. And we seem to think, well, it's all right, they can vanish just so long as we have them recorded. No, there aren't any whales anymore, but you can read about them in the Encyclopedia Britannica. And this confusion of the world of representations with the world of nature is just disastrous. So therefore, it's tremendously important for us to get back to the world of nature. You may have a concept that the world of nature is unspiritual. A lot of people do. And a lot of people are at odds with their bodies. But what they are at odds with, really, as I think I tried to point out yesterday, is not this, but their idea of this. A lot of people resent physical change. They resent the idea of the dissolution process that is involved in physical change, that you get older, and that therefore from a conceptual point of view you get uglier. And that just isn't true. If you are alive and alert, old people are not ugly at all, just by virtue of being old. Only, you see, we have very, very rigid concepts of wherein physical beauty consists. So it's important to abandon those ideas, at least occasionally, because if you are very attached to them, you can always take them up again later. But you see, if you think all the time, it's like talking all the time. I am found by you as a very talkative person, but I assure you that I'm a good listener. In social gatherings, I'll often hold the floor only because somebody hasn't yet produced something more interesting. And the minute somebody does, I'm very silent and attentive, because if I talk all the time, I won't hear what anyone else has to say. Likewise, if I think all the time, I won't have anything to think about except thoughts. And that leaves me high and dry. I become like a library where all the books that are constantly added to it are about the books already in it. And that is pretty much what our big libraries are doing. So it would be as if a painter never saw anything but art galleries. As if a musician listened to nothing but concerts. And so, very simply, this is being out of touch with the world that is naturally with us. I won't even say presented to our senses. That is too conceptual. Lao Tzu said, "The 5 colors make a man blind. The 5 tones make a man deaf." Because if you think there are only 5 colors, you're blind. And if you think there are only 5 tones, you're deaf. There is, as we know, an infinite continuum of sound and color. And the spectrum is merely a matter of convenience in classification. So, likewise, when you read in ancient texts of mysticism that it's necessary to go beyond the senses, that's very easily misunderstood. It is not so much the senses, that is to say the eyes, the ears, etc., which falsify. It's our conceptions of what the eyes and the ears bring to us. In other words, it is not the percept but the concept, wherein we find the root of Maya, illusion, or of course magic, because you can use conceptualization creatively if you know what you're doing. That's very important. But if you don't know what you're doing, your concept of reality can completely delude you. So begin again with seeing what happens if you're just generally aware of yourself and your surroundings without taking any idea whatsoever about it seriously. and using no words. You see? I'm using words, but for the time being you listen to my words as if they had no meaning, as if I were just making noises at you. And in this marvelous state of ignorance, there will be nothing called time, nothing called space, nothing called self, and nothing called other. There is just the happening. And it's not supposed to be anything particular. Whatever state of feeling you find yourself in, that's the way it's going. That's this. And you have no standards whereby to criticize it, to approve of it or disapprove of it. It's quite simply what there is. And sometimes it's delightful. I won't make a discipline out of it because that'll put you off. Sometimes it's delightful simply to sit and be that. Of course, in the fancy world it's called meditation. But watch that. See, it's awfully important that we know what we're talking about. That I can not only tell you about Tao, but show it to you. And that's the way to show it. See, that's extraordinarily simple. And because of our concepts, what makes this difficult to understand is that our minds are caught up in two questions. Why are we doing it? And what's the use of it? It's amazing how we are conditioned to turn everything into profit. And feel guilty if we're not. Now, that's a very dangerous thing to say to children. But we all have a kind of a conscience in us. I'll call it the commercial conscience, which is saying, in what way is this bettering your situation? If not financially, are you improving your mind? Are you becoming more spiritual? Whatever that is. And so we don't understand that any state that we could truly call meditation, or I prefer the word contemplation rather than meditation, you cannot be in that state for a purpose, or in a state of mind that is expecting a result to flow from it. Because the moment you do that, you are not in that state. You are bothering about concepts instead. This is, as it were, the one thing that, the one science, as it were, that has no goal in the sense of objective in the future. The stream begins in the mountains and runs down to the ocean. And we are apt to say the stream is moving to the ocean as its goal. But when it gets to the ocean, the water is again evaporated by the sun's heat and it returns to the mountains and it comes down again. Because the stream has no purpose to reach the ocean. Indeed, the stream is simultaneously in the sky, in the mountains, on its course, and in the ocean. It's in all places at once. And therefore it is not going anywhere. It is simply going. So when a Zen master was asked the question, "What is Tao?" he said, "Walk on." And really nothing will stop that. One cannot not walk on. The flow is there whether you resist it or whether you don't. And when you resist it, you're like somebody swimming against the current, which is a fast way to drown. And the skill of it lies in sailing, is to go intelligently with the current, steering it and using it. But it bothers us, especially Western industrial people, very much indeed, to consider a philosophy of no purpose. Because when we say of something, it has no future in it, that's equivalent to saying it's bad. But people use the word purpose and the word meaning in different ways. And often when we speak of a meaningless life or a purposeless life, in a negative, derogatory way, we are meaning actually a person who lives life for extremely short-term purposes. The same sort of restlessness that is encouraged in you by turning over the pages of such a magazine as Life. Now you realize that a magazine of that character is designed really to keep you away from any sort of serenity. No article in it is satisfactory in the sense of giving you anything to chew on. It ends too soon. It gives you just a flip here and a flip there. It never goes into anything deeply. It gives you a set of impressions. And you get pictures in it that are exciting or sensational or unusual, which momentarily entertain you, and you go through a whole issue and remember nothing. But it keeps you in a state of pacified agitation while you're flying on an airplane, waiting in an office, thumbing through something before breakfast, sort of thing. And this is the entire characteristic of a person who lives for short-term purposes. And that normally is what one would call the meaningless life. In contrast to that, a meaningful life is generally understood to be one devoted to long-term purposes. but what we call serious things. But the Taoist standpoint is neither of those. Because probably a Taoist will have thought through the question, what do I want? Very carefully. And have realized there's something spurious about most of our long-term purposes. Because when you think realistically and long-termishly about the state of human civilization, you see not much more than muddling through a mess. You will then say, well, what are we talking about then when we talk about a meaningful life? I think we should have a little bit more precision here than we usually do. In a very strict sense, words have meaning, and reality is meaning, and therefore has none. The word, the idea, which is a complex of words or other symbols, functions as a pointer to something other than itself, and that other is its meaning. So when you ask the question, what do trees and rivers mean? The answer is they don't, because they're not words, because they're not signs. Unless you say a river is a sign of rain. This is a kind of redundant statement, because a river is rain draining off the earth. So a river, the splendor of the river is that it is the meaning and has none. And therefore there is a quality of meaninglessness, of having no meaning, and yet of being meaning to all nature. Wittgenstein makes the remark that it is curious that when after long questing there are people who feel that they understand the sense of life, nevertheless they cannot say wherein that sense consists. I experience something, some human being or some quality of light or tree or flower or work of art that I find is important. And I might use the word, it has tremendous meaning for me. And yet, when asked what that is, I am at a loss for words. Because actually, in the very high sense, nature is nonsense. And in this way also, music is nonsense, especially classical music. Whether it be the classical music of the West or the classical music of India or China. Because all classical music is non-representative, non-symbolic. It does not represent anything other than itself. It is patterning of sound. And it is like ferns, which are vegetable patternings, like crystals, which are chemical patternings. And like animals, you see, with their marvelous routines. And when we look at the routines of the animals and the plants, we with our purposive minds say, all this is for the purpose of survival. Now, for the survival of what? We have already defined the entire organism in terms of a purpose for survival. All the parts of a plant are shown to have roles in the survival process. So the survival process has as its fundamental purpose the continuation of the survival process. We with our purposive minds say, all this is for the purpose of survival. Now, for the survival of what? We have already defined the entire organism in terms of a purpose for survival. All the parts of a plant are shown to have roles in the survival process. So the survival process has as its fundamental purpose the continuation of the survival process. And nothing has been said. It's purely tautological. We're going on so as to go on. And this is a purely, I would call it an engineering approach to nature, where the engineer looks at a situation in the standpoint of efficiency. And has no raison d'etre in his thinking for inefficient processes. So therefore, if I would be going from here to there, the engineer wants me to go in the shortest possible distance and the quickest possible time. And will take a straight route rather than a wiggly one. And one goes wiggly, however, not merely to say fit better to the contours of the land, but to enjoy wiggling. Enjoyment of wiggling is really fundamental to life. It isn't wiggly just because that's the easiest way for it to be. It is wiggly for the pure love of wiggling. Why do we wear shirts like you're wearing, covered with interesting floral wiggles? Somehow those wiggles please the eye and are restful, whereas plain surfaces and straight lines are not always restful unless very skillfully handled, because they make the eye go boom, boom, see? Whereas in a floral setting, the eye can wander. Of course, let's overdo it like Victorian wallpaper, because that kills everything with too much of it. The Japanese do it so skillfully by using the emptiness and displaying against this a very clear wiggle, as in a flower arrangement or a calligraphic painting. So the space and the wiggle complement each other. So likewise, if you are running, engineering mentalities go jogging. And they plod, 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 chunking along a course. But one who really understands running dances the course. And he will be swerving and just on his toes, delightfully going. And he will really be a more effective runner than a jogger. because he's not doing it out of a sense of duty. And he doesn't have getting there in mind. And if you have getting there in mind, the whole journey is a chore. That's why when you're traveling in a car or by any other means, you wear yourself out by being in a hurry to get there. Absolutely arrived exhausted. Because all along you've been pushing at it. And there was no need to. You would be amazed if you set out to go somewhere in no hurry, how astonishingly soon you seem to arrive. If you go out in a hurry, it'll take forever to get there. So what is, to understand the Chinese and Japanese appreciation of natural form, which they derive essentially from Taoism, secondarily from Zen, because Zen is Buddhism as influenced by Taoism. You find increasingly that what characterizes their whole approach to art is the purposelessness of nature. In other forms of religious art, you find very symbolic style figures, paintings, sculpture. And these figures are normally symmetrical. But what you find in the Taoist and the Zen feeling for nature is that the focal point of reverence, of fascination, will be the unsymmetrical. It could be simply a rock of peculiar shape that has been set in space in a certain way. The rock, the bamboo, etc., is not intended to have any symbolic meaning whatsoever. It's the same likewise with the Zen stories. When somebody asks what is the fundamental meaning of Buddhism, and the master says, I didn't feel like wearing shoes today, I know very well that ignorant Chinese people will look for symbolism in this and will explain it by some sort of allegorical performance. But that is not the meaning of it at all. This is not the sense of a Zen remark. You cannot understand the sense of the Zen remark without being rather stupid. That is to say, taking it simply for what it is. He wasn't talking about not wearing any shoes. To lead you round through a kind of symbol that is a code known only to the initiates, there will be no point in such a thing, but simply talking quite directly. That's the reason. That is the fundamental meaning of Buddhism, because the fundamental meaning is again the Tao, and I've shown you what the Tao is. The happening. Get with it. How can you not? So those works of art give the feeling. So supposing such a favorite scene is painted as a mountain landscape, and somewhere in it tiny little human figures. It's a poet wandering along through pine trees beside a stream. Where is he going? Where is the stream going? Where are the clouds going? Where are the birds going? We don't know, really. They are wandering on. And so you get the quality which the Japanese call Yugen. Yugen is made of two characters which mean mysterious and deep. But a Japanese dramatist, Soami, said, now Yugen is when you are watching wild geese and they are suddenly hidden by a cloud. When you are looking at ships far out to sea and they are hidden by a far-off island. Yugen is to wander on and on in a great forest without thought of return. Now, in these poetic expressions, you get a feel of a certain kind. I got plenty of nothing, and nothing is plenty for me. See, this is the same sort of thing. Another Chinese poem starts out, my thoughts will wander in the great void. This is Yugen. Yugen, therefore, is the sensation of life, of nature, going but going nowhere. But it's not the sort of nowhere that we imagine when we see a sign which says no through road, or when we come to what we call a blank wall. Going nowhere is going into pregnant space where we do not know, as it were, what will come of it. It's when space is used to let your imagination flow into it without being specific. When a certain kind of music hints at something, but never spoils its subtlety by explaining it. It is for the same reason that a joke is funny when a joke is not explained. And you do not even explain to yourself why you laugh, because that would spoil it. And so in the same way, there is this mysterious, which is not defined, but which you understand and see the beauty of it, just as you see the humor of the joke, without defining it. And that is why, incidentally, there is no adequate philosophy of humor, and certainly no funny philosophy of humor. A lot of philosophers and psychologists have written about the psychology of laughter in an extremely boring way. And in a way it is as futile to discuss aesthetics in a kind of philosophical way as if we were trying to find out the formula for creating the beautiful object. But the poets, the Japanese and Chinese, repeatedly bring up images which evoke the marvel of purposelessness. Now let me give you an illustration. In Japan and in China, they love building temples on the sides of mountains. And especially forested mountains. In Japan you will get a tree very like the sequoia. It's called a cryptomeria. And there are vast cathedral-like forests on the sides of mountains. Well, you'll see a great gate at the bottom of the mountain. And all kinds of ornate carvings in the gate, because it's in the ancient Tang Dynasty Chinese style, which is the style of Japanese temple architecture. And there are clouds and dragons and Apsara girls and all sorts of wonders in this gate. And you go through, and there's a grand set of stone steps flanked by guardian dogs and bronze lanterns, going up, marvelous approach. And at the top of it is another such gate with maybe great sliding doors in it. And you go beyond that, and there is a courtyard surrounded with maple trees in front of the cryptomerias. And there is the temple. Splendid, great building. You go inside, and there is a marvelous golden altar with Buddhas and incense and golden lotus flowers and candles, and very, very splendid. And there's Buddha sitting on his lotus throne, smiling down at you. Well, after that, somehow or other, these things are all rigged so that you find yourself behind the temple, and lo and behold, there's another flight of steps going up, not perhaps quite so grand. And you go up and up and up and up, and at last a different kind of temple confronts you. This may be a Shinto temple, and this will be very simple in construction. Or it might be the hermitage, the personal house of the chief priest. The gate to this is more rustic, and there may be a small garden round it, leading you to a further ascent of steps beyond. And you go up and up and up once again. And here is a graveyard. They don't have sort of ugly tombstones like we do. They have simply square pillars with the name of the deceased written on in Chinese characters. Sometimes they're wooden. And there's this sense of the graveyard. Somehow it's not quite as depressing, because somehow the graveyard simply says it all flows away. And right at the back of the graveyard there's another shrine, and you get to that, and what is in it, in the place of honor? A mirror. And then, oh my goodness, there's still another flight going up. Just very crude, small steps going yet higher into the trees. And suddenly, the trail vanishes into the bushes. And a haiku poem says, "This is all there is. The path comes to an end among the parsley." And don't you remember that as a child? Of exploring around somebody's garden, and there are all sorts of, you look at things, you see, from them low down, And you don't look over the top of everything like an adult does. And so you explore little ways that go round and through bushes. And here's a trail, and finally it just vanishes into, it might very well be parsley. And I so vividly remember that, how magical that was. I felt I could disappear at that point and never be discovered. That there were all sorts of secrets hidden in those bushes. I never specified what they were. That was the whole point. We cannot conceive the real thing that we want. It would spoil it to do it, because then it would become a mere conception. What we're looking for is the great surprise, you see? And to the degree that we preconceive it, it will fall flat. The whole principle of the universe, you see, if Tao's principle is spontaneity, it is to accomplish a miracle without doing anything, without planning it. And you will see here a coincidentia oppositorum, as you can find out, for example, by exploring the relationship between doing and happening. You can explore the relationship of freedom and necessity. And you can see that as you can't visualize one without the other, that there could be a state in which you can see all process as simultaneously free and necessary. That's a contradiction in ordinary logic. But when we say of something that it happens necessarily, we are separating this happening from a cause. And that is a purely conceptual separation. Strictly speaking, everything that happens is part of the same event as its cause. Like I was showing you that the river is all one event. You can't say that a river is caused by its source. And if it wasn't flowing, there'd be no water in the ocean to pick up, sort of thing. And so you can get to a point where you understand that it's only, you look at your behavior, at the Tao from one point of view, and you can see it's free. That is to say, it is emerging now from the void. Quite freely, quite spontaneously. So look at it from another point of view, and you can see that everything that happens, happens necessarily. Actually, the truth is neither one nor the other. These are just different ways of classifying, ways of looking at it. It's like what you call in mathematics finding a limit. That is to say, if I have a magnet, has North Pole and South Pole, and I start at the North Pole, chopping, cut off sections, approaching the South Pole. At every point that I cut off a piece, I will have a North Pole. It will still be north, all the way until I get right to the end when the whole magnet has been chopped up and it disappears. Okay, let's do the other way. I begin from the South Pole. Every time I chop, getting closer to the north, the piece left is still south. That's the idea of a limit. So in the same way, if you approach the world from the end called necessity, and you'd start chopping to get to the end called freedom. It will always be necessity if you approach it that way, and you'll see everything as happening necessarily. Then if you turn it round and begin at the end called freedom, it'll always be freedom until you get to necessity and the thing disappears. For this reason now, then, the poet who speaks next to the musician most eloquently about Tao doesn't philosophize. The poet merely gives the image. This is all there is. The path comes to an end in the pathway.